We are here celebrating the King Day holiday, but we're here also as we strengthen the bonds between the Jewish community and the African American community.
Let us work together, because not one of us is free until every last one of us is free.
This is where we get the question that we welcome you here this morning, because the question that we want to ask you this morning is, Cain said to God on his face and said, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And God took a moment and didn't slap him and said, "Cain, thy brother's blood is crying from the ground." There's no reason for us to come together and pat each other on the back if we don't know where we're going to go from here. There's no reason for us to pat each other on the back if we're not going to unite, hold hands, hold hearts, and go out and hear the blood that's crying and say that the answer that must be, am I my brother's keeper? If you don't mind, just repeat and talk back to me and say, "Yes, I am." You're welcome.
Pleasure. So today we're talking about the Jewish and African American relations. And so I want to take a step back before we move into the future. And from your perspective, what have been some of the defining moments of the relationship between Jews and African Americans over the last 100 years?
There has been a remarkably strong relationship. We share narratives that are parallel to one another. We understand what it means to be marginalized in a society. We understand what it means to be persecuted in a society. And we also understand what it means to live with hope. So the relationship between blacks and Jews in the country's history has been a very strong one, going all the way back to the early 20th century. The city of Chicago has much to be proud of with the example of Julius Rosenwald and the work that was done through his largesse, through the Federation over the years. But the road hasn't always been an easy one. And so I'm very proud to be here with my good friend, Pastor Chris Harris, because we have been building a new relationship for the future, bringing together people from our respective communities.
With similar histories and similar struggles, many of us have missed the opportunity to keep this relationship going. And so Michael and I feel we have a responsibility to our generation and the next to make sure we raise awareness of a relationship that has existed long before we came along. And the beautiful part about it is there's this idea that Jews and blacks have not been together. And I believe that's because of the tremendous gap in the last 4 to 5 decades where that story has not been told.
A lot happened in the 60s, a lot happened in the 70s, and into the 80s, and there were some difficult words that were shared between the communities. But history has a way of moving forward. The Jewish community that existed then has evolved. The black community that has existed then has evolved. But we have never been all that distant when it comes to the things that matter.
It's quite interesting because when I talk to so many African Americans about the history of our connectivity and then the reasons we disconnected, you find a lot of people with a lot of different perceptions and a lot of different reasons. But the bottom line is most people really don't know why the disconnect happened. And there's so many other folks who were born in between that time who never investigated. And so we hope to be able to tell that story, have that hard conversation.
So the next question really is around where do you think the relations stand today?
It's important that we acknowledge that we're meeting 50 years after the march from Selma to Montgomery. Because in that march, hundreds of the marchers were people from the Jewish community. And a little known fact that I just learned actually yesterday was that the black community was so impressed by the strength of numbers and the ways that the Jewish community was involved that the black marchers began to wear yarmulkes in the march, and they called them freedom caps. And that's a very powerful message about where we have been. But one thing that Chris and I are painfully aware of, we have relied too much on the past without looking to a new future. 50 years is a long time. So after a hiatus, you have to get to know each other again. And a new generation has to get to know each other again. And while we can be inspired by Rabbi Heschel and Dr. King, they're not telling our story today. We have to write our new history. We need to learn how to walk together in our age just as they did in theirs.
A lot of people, the first thing they come to me and say, well, Pastor Chris, did you know we walked together and we marched together 50 years ago? And they immediately show me this beautiful frame with Dr. King and Rabbi Heschel marching. And I always remind them, unfortunately, we can't take credit for what they did, especially in this generation. And so now we have to make sure that if we're going to be serious about the Jewish-African-American relationship, being rock solid and staying rock solid, we have to keep the old frame and put in some new pictures of us marching together now. And in your question you ask, how is the relationship now? I'd like to say between Michael and I as friends, between our families and our congregations and now our communities, it's rock solid, but it's not enough. We need more people to join in and be serious about tangible things, not just a nice platitudes on Martin Luther King Day or us singing a great song together. It has to be more tangible work in the community outside the places of worship.
Part of a relationship is really understanding the other's pain. And I'm not at all sure that the Jewish community is fully cognizant of the challenges in the African American community. And I'm not at all sure that the African American community is cognizant of the challenges in the Jewish community. I'll give you an example. We had a hunger seder here at the Federation, and the Federation has just been a tremendous partner to us throughout. And so at the hunger seder, under normal circumstances, it's designed to sensitize Jews to hunger in America and throughout the world. But when you're doing a hunger seder with an inner city African American church, the people in the room, or at least a significant percentage of people in the room, don't need to be sensitized. That's right. And so we had to rewrite the Seder to allow for that and to come to terms with the reality of hunger. At the same time, we talked about hunger in the Jewish community and the work that the Federation does and other organizations do. And one of the people from Bright Star said, you know, I never knew there were hungry Jews. And so what you're looking at are two communities getting to know each other, getting to understand each other. You can't have a friendship, at least a meaningful relationship, unless you really understand the other person's pain.
I remember one of our first conversations that I shared with Rabbi Siegel. There is a pipeline from our perspective that take young people from African American communities from the cradle straight to prison. And we talk about the fact that there's a system that we believe is in existence and has been in existence for a long time, and it needs to be broken. And I remember Michael challenged me, and he said, well, Chris, I got to be honest. I don't see that. I don't believe that. And I encouraged him to read a book by Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow. And a few weeks later, Michael came back to me and he said, you know, I read the book. Thanks for challenging me. And I see things another way. That solidified our relationship. The fact that he was willing to at least examine or at least look into what I was saying. A lot of people want to act like it does not exist. But when he was willing to look into it, it made me be willing to look into what's going on in Israel, what's going on in the Jewish community. And I'm so glad I did, because that's what brought us together beyond being friends, but now being family.
We make a mistake when we think that we're going to create change on a national level.
That's right.
Politics are local, relationships are local. What I have found is that the partners are out there. And we need to reach out, because that's the only way real change is going to happen. what really matters is what happens tomorrow for the next generation. And when we have kids who step up in our community and say, instead of having a bar mitzvah party, we want to go and build a playground at Bright Star Church. That matters. Today's Martin Luther King Day, and there's a program going on at Bright Star Church today where youth from our two houses of worship are working with veterans, and our kids are learning. Their parents are with them. They're learning, and those experiences are going to make a difference for these kids, and they're going to come up with an idea, and they're going to see what's possible. That's what we're here to do. That's really being bearers of God's message, I think.
When he said, what more can we do? I said, well, one of the first things we need to do is start with young people, because adults have so many isms and schisms, divisions, opinions, and perceptions that are not always true. I said, but if you take children and you put them in the same room together, then they don't have all of that adultism, all of those issues, and they will play with one another. And then if they grow together as friends, they become family. And when he came and called and said, Chris, you wouldn't believe it, 2 kids want to build a playground for their bar mitzvah in the black neighborhood, not only did chills go down my spine, but my congregation was floored. The Bronzeville community was blown away. And so many people were just shocked that this could actually happen. And to see it manifested, where you had hundreds of African Americans and Jews together building a playground on the south side of Chicago. We think it's important that the world know what's going on, because if they don't see it, they cannot ever be able to duplicate it. I was thinking about how at that luncheon we had at the synagogue, and Rabbi Siegel leaned over to me and asked me, had you ever gone to AIPAC? I said, no, I've never been. So he said, you should probably just go. And I went to AIPAC, got connected through the African American Outreach portion of AIPAC, and ended up going to Israel in November of 2012. And when I went and saw the place called Natal, it blew me away. Post-trauma counseling center. And I couldn't help but to wonder, could not this be? What if this is the very thing that God wanted me to see in getting this connection? Because if 1,400 people have been murdered in Chicago alone, not including those who have been wounded or shot, or other issues that are trauma-related, who did the post-trauma counseling for those families? Whether it was the perpetrator's family or the victim's family. And in most cases, nobody. And so when I saw it in Israel, I said, this is what I want to do. I want to bring a piece of Israel to Bronzeville. And we're calling it the Bronzeville Dream Center. And people like Rabbi Siegel and so many others, including the Jewish Federation, are partnering with what we're doing. And I was not the only one that went to Israel. People like Deborah Wesley and folks that do work at Mount Sinai, they went to Israel, saw the work that Natal was doing. And now you have a team of individuals who are working together to bring a piece of Israel to Bronzeville, calling it the Bronzeville Dream Center, where our 4 core competencies will be parenting, counseling, mentorship, and workforce development, all because of a trip to Israel. And it all started with a lunch between Jews and black. It is that work that is starting to bridge that divide that has been there, renew the fellowship and relationship. And I'm really, really excited about it, because where we cannot provide answers for the past, we can provide a solution for the future, and that is coming together as one unit.
This is holy work. And what a gift it is to see the power of the connections that we're making and the fruit that it's bearing. We are living in a time when the plagues that we read about in the book of Exodus are so apparent. Mm-hmm. If we open our eyes, and gun violence is a plague on our community, but we're not addressing it as a plague. We're not seeing how something like that, the scourge of gun violence, is slowly creeping and choking our entire society and threatening all of us. Mm-hmm. We've got to be able to do something together. And each of us has a role to play in this drama, every one of us. And it just takes one step. It just means taking that first step. And that's where miracles are created, when you're willing to go beyond what you thought, your own preconceived notions about things, and take that step forward.
So where do we go from here? Where do you see us moving forward?
We need to hold each other accountable to, for lack of a better term, come out of the closet with our relationship. Make sure that we start to be open about the fact that blacks and Jews have been together for a long time and we should be together now. We need to close that gap, especially with this younger generation.
Part of our goal is to expand beyond 2 synagogues. What I've learned about rabbis and congregations around the city of Chicago is that they're very open to the possibility of making connections with other churches. And what we want to do is just to broaden the effort, because there are many, many stories that are about to be told when we create those relationships.
And people are watching. Just recently we had at our church, Rabbi Karen Kadar and BJBE Synagogue came and we shared the pulpit together, honoring Dr. King, and we were able to tag team preach, which was pretty inspirational for our community. And recently, you've heard of all of the Black Lives Matter movements across the country. You have Trayvon Martin, you have Eric Garner, and Mike Brown, African-American males who were shot, who were unarmed. And the reality is there needs to be a message sent across that Black lives do matter. And we did a protest, and Rabbi Siegel sent his colleagues from the synagogue. Rabbi Kadar came, Rabbi David came, and so many of the other folks from the Jewish community came to march with us, marching down Cottage Grove. Now, just imagine, a few years back, it probably just would have been a group of African Americans marching down. But to see a multicultural group of folks saying Black Lives Matter, it meant something now to the Bronzeville community at a broader level.
We've done a lot for a rabbi and a pastor, and we've seen the possibilities. But at this point in time, we need to work with the organized Jewish community in order to move forward. And that's why I'm so happy that the Federation has really set a mark as to how to go forward. And your work in the Jewish Community Relations Council is really going to take us, I think, forward in helping bring together the Jewish community and the black community here in Chicago.
We want this to happen all across the country, so other rabbis and other African Americans should be able to see this and say, what Michael and Chris are doing in Chicago, we want to do it in Trenton, New Jersey. We want to do it in Atlanta. We want to do it in California. We won't stop until we see that happen.
What I would hope that people would feel at the end of this television show is simply to be left with a question. What am I doing? What should I be doing? And what obligations does my religious affiliation, does my belief system hold on me to get involved? Because the God that cried out and saw the pain of the Israelites in Egypt is a God that created all people and feels all of our pain, whether it's in Chicago or whether it's in Africa or anywhere else. But God needs us, our hands, our voices, in order to fulfill the promise of humanity and the creation itself. That's our job.
Get informed, get inspired, and then get involved. It's real simple. What are the next steps? If you're Jewish, go find some black friends. If you're black, go find some Jewish friends. And then let the world know that you are friends. Don't be ashamed of it. And start to do tangible work that people can see. You want unity? Be the catalyst that brings that to pass.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us today.
Friends, we are here today together to get specific. Throughout his life, Dr. King drew inspiration from the specifics of the story of the flight of the ancient Israelites from bondage to freedom. Picture it. Behind them, an advancing army. Before them, an expansive and impassable sea. Trapped, Moses cried out to God, but God rebuked him. Why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to move forward. Forward where? The Israelites hesitated until a leader appeared willing to step ahead into the rushing waters with faith that his actions could make a difference. This leader teaches Jewish tradition was not one of the headliners of the Exodus narrative. Not Moses, nor Aaron, not Miriam, nor Joshua, but instead he was a man named Nachshon, wading through the rising tide only when the waters rose all the way up to his nostrils. Does our tradition teach us that the sea split open? Nachshon was willing to take risks for a better future for his people, for his faith in the promise of freedom from on high. And in doing so, he catalyzed redemption. There is so much more we can do together, and there has not been a better moment in the last 50 years for us to come together and dream of what is possible. What can each of us actually do to get specific when it comes to the holy work of keeping each other? Will business owners commit to hire kids from Lawndale for internships this summer? Will students in our community ask themselves, can I organize my school, my friends, my neighbors to demand equal access to quality education? Will churches and synagogues from all over our communities partner with each other, eat together, pray together beyond this day once a year? Will we find new ways to see and know each other, to learn from each other, to be sensitive to our assumptions and our words, to listen to our histories and our stories, where they align and also where they diverge? Will we be able to keep each other in the highest expression of the ideal? The sages of my tradition tell a story about a man who goes out on a boat with his friends and once offshore starts to drill a hole under the bottom of his seat. His friends ask him to stop, but he continues, "The hole is only under my own seat and not yours." His companions cry out, "But if you continue, the boat will sink and we will all drown. Don't you see we are all in the same boat together?" And as the great human rights activist Lila Watson famously said, "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come here because your liberation is bound up in mine, let us work together."
There's a man who was driving on the side of a road and he pulled into a little cattywampus little side and he fell off into a ditch. Mud, spinning tires, couldn't get out. Trying to flag people down there on the side of a dirt road. He's not going to see a lot of people. Finally, he sees a man coming on a horse with a little buggy on the back. He says, "Sir, this may be an impossibility, but can your horse be strapped up to my car and pull it out the ditch?" The man said, "Yeah, let's work it out." Got his horse hooked up to the car. And right before the man did a little whip thing to call the horse to move, he said, "Becky and Jerome and Jerron and Sam, hiya!" The horse snapped, went and just pulled the car right up right at the time. The man got the car situated and he came up to the man and he said, "Man, thank you so much for helping me. This is impossible. I never knew how I was going to get out of it. But you got to ask me something. You only had one horse. Why you say all these names? You just said Becky and Mary and Johnson and the horse moved." He said, "You got to understand, my horse is blind. But if my horse knew that he was the only one pulling your car out, he might not have moved." We have a community that's in a ditch. And I need the rabbis, and I need the priests, and I need the preachers, and I need the thugs, and I need everybody to pull these cars out the ditches. I'm tired of kids coming to my offices with Glocks and 9s and don't know what else to do but carrying it around. I need you. You need me.
We hope today's show gave you new insight into the dynamic state of relations between the Jewish and African American communities in Chicago. Special thanks to all our guests and those who joined in the Martin Luther King Day celebration. Don't forget, you can access daily updates on the Jewish community in Israel at the Jewish United Fund website at www.juf.org. As always, we welcome your input and encourage you to send your comments and questions to sanctuary@juf.org. Thanks for joining us today. Have an exciting Purim and a rich and meaningful Passover. We'll see you in May. Shalom.